Hiyo, Daily Riders. Zach here, and welcome to another episode where we learn about motorcycles as we ride. Our guest today is the Suzuki GSX-8R. That is approximately an 800cc parallel twin-cylinder engine sitting in a chassis that's pretty sporty to sit on and even sportier to look at, all with an MSRP of a little under $10,000 US. Pretty basic spec sheet in the world of motorcycling for 2025, would you agree? Now, what if I told you that that is one of, if not the best-selling Suzuki in America right now? Yeah, it's true. So on the ride to work today, we will talk about how the GSX-8R rides and why it sells. Off we go. All right, everybody. Welcome to this daily rider on the Suzuki GSX-8R. Before we get going, a quick reminder, this video is brought to you by RevZilla, which is not just a YouTube channel that you're watching, but an e-commerce platform that sells things for motorcycles and people who love them. So the next time you need new tires, perhaps a cover for your motorcycle, a helmet, jacket, gloves for yourself, every little bit of money you spend at RevZilla, a tiny bit of it, goes into making these videos here. Daily Rider, as well as a shop manual with Ari Henning, CTXP Adventures, and the High Side, Low Side podcast. Just something to keep in mind next time you need something for you or your bike. In the meantime, thanks very much for watching. Yo, righty. Right here we have the 776cc parallel twin, 270 crank. Pretty run-of-the-mill, you might say, in this day and age, but a big deal for Suzuki because for a long time Suzuki didn't really have any new engines. They sort of like tweaked on that 1000cc V-twin that was in the V-Strom 1000, V-Strom 1050, and then they had the 650 V-twin in SV and V-Strom, and then they had a bunch of inline fours that were sort of plucked from mid-2000s. Most of it was just sort of like regurgitated stuff. This engine is, as of a few years ago, all new and has been placed in this GSX-8R as well as the other GSX-8 models, the S as well as the T and TT and the V-Strom 800. Chassis-wise, the GSX-8R is nothing super duper special. I think there's preload adjustability in the shock, and that's it. Otherwise, no adjustability in the suspension. It is a steel frame and a detachable subframe, which is kind of a nice feature, I would say. And other than that, pretty basic suspension and braking componentry. Nissan radial mount calipers, which is nice, but rubber lines, regular size rotors, axial lever, kind of basic mumbo jumbo. Before I get too far into it, you can click on a link in the description of this video and you can find some articles on Common Tread that have a lot more detail to do with the design and execution of the bike, how the engine fits into Suzuki's lineup, and so on and so forth. Another thing I'd like to address is yes, I did not misspeak. This is the best-selling Suzuki in America. Not every single day, every single quarter, every single month or whatever, but it is more or less the best-selling Suzuki in America, more than GSX-Rs, more than DRZs, more than V-Stroms. And I think when we ride it, we're going to learn why that's the case. So let's spark it up, shall we? You can flick on this, what is it, 5-inch TFT, I think, which is a little bit dirty, but a nice clean display, which I kind of like. And we can press the starter and listen to this engine. Ducka, 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 as you'd expect. Quick to rev and ready to please. Interesting kind of little Cyclops, or dual Cyclops. A dual is that if there are two eyes, you can't be a dual Cyclops, Zach. It's good. It's just two eyes. So vertically mounted twin headlights here. I don't think the looks are particularly good or bad, personally. Let's ride to work, shall we? Off we go, GSX-8R. As for specs, the 776cc engine I mentioned claims about 80 horsepower, I think 82 maybe, something like that, and around 57 foot-pounds of torque if memory serves. Friendly reminder that all the specs in imperial and metric are listed in the description of the video. There's a 31.9-inch seat height, which, as you can see, provides a pretty generous bend in my knee at 6'2". I think 32 inches is kind of an average seat height, as I've said on this program before, and I think this bike qualifies as a sort of average size and average height for a motorcycle. It's very reasonable to sit on at a stop. It's fairly narrow in the middle and just generally doesn't feel particularly heavy between the legs, even though with only 3.7 gallons of fuel in the tank, it tipped the scales at the Daily Rider shop at 452 pounds, which I think might be exactly what Suzuki claims. But at any rate, 450 pounds is not a small motorcycle, but I think carries its weight pretty well. It feels pretty compact and unintimidating, even though it weighs the same as I mean, some full-on 1000cc superbikes. Last thing to cover is the MSRP, which for 2025 is, I believe, $9,669. You might find, depending on when you're watching this video, that the 2026 models are available for $9,699. In other words, a $30 price bump for 2026, as far as I understand it, as well as a new colorway. But yeah, about 10 grand, right? We agree that that's fair to say? And the price is not particularly notable by itself, but when we start talking about comps to other motorcycles in the class later in the program, of course, that will be a valid number to consider, because it's a little higher than some people want it to be, it seems. As for what the old GSX-8R feels like to sit on, there's a good conversation to be had there, because it's actually quite upright. The handlebars, I forget the exact measurement. Is it 2.3 inches lower? I don't remember. Maybe we can put that on screen. The handlebars are a little bit lower than the GSX-8S naked bike, but in my opinion, this bike feels pretty darn comfortable. Now, the reason that it's interesting that the GSX-8R is not very uncomfortable is that there's a lot of variety in comfort for bikes like this, bikes in this class. For example, Yamaha R7, very committed. Like, you lean way forward, it feels like a true sport bike when you sit on it. Aprilia RS660, not so much more upright and comfortable, similar to the GSX-8R. That's something that is a common misconception in this class and in the sort of world of motorcycling, because you see the bodywork, you see the company labeling it as a sport bike, and you're bound to think certain things, and it's not always clear exactly what the outright feel of the bike is like. And this one is definitely on the comfortable side of sport. It sort of feels like a sport touring bike. So some people are going to hear me say the word sport touring and they're going to be like, oh, that's lame. It's not, I promise. Bear with me, we'll talk about sporting prowess a little bit later. But on the topic of taking this bike on a longer trip, I did get some questions on the Instagrams about what would it be like to take it on a multi-day trip. I think it's actually really good. You know, this engine, as I mentioned, is practically the one from the V-Strom 800, which is a travel motorcycle, if nothing else. And 70, 75, 80 miles an hour on the freeway, there's no vibration that's ever going to bother you, in my opinion. It cruises really nicely, it feels good, there's lots of roll-on power. It's just a nice, linear, productive, industrious engine. Works really well. And fuel mileage, for me anyway, was around 50, which I don't tend to ride motorcycles particularly politely, especially when I'm testing them. The average of 50 miles per gallon wasn't too bad, in my opinion. The downside is that 3.7 gallon tank, which you're not going to get a lot of miles out of, right? I mean, still, you're going to go 150 miles probably on a tank. That's where I was filling up most of the time, 140, 150. If what you want to do is travel on this bike and take a multi-day trip, or, you know, ride twisties and put a tank bag on it and put some tail bag, some luggage, whatever, you might find yourself a little bit disappointed in that. I guess where I'm going with all of this is I could see a Suzuki GSX-8 GT, slightly taller windscreen, you know, up here somewhere, a little more wind protection. You could do taller handlebar if you wanted to, but I didn't think you need to. Maybe a thicker seat and then some mounts for some luggage back there. I think that's what this bike would be quite good at. And I know that you're gonna think that that means it's not a good sport bike, but it's really more of a compliment than an insult to say that this bike could be and is quite good at this kind of thing. I will say one thing that always reminds me that this is a sport bike is the mirrors, which are mounted way up here on the front of the fairing, so they're kind of far away. Field of view is kind of small. They're in general not great. Just a little bit more of a view of my forearm than I want, but I tend to be kind of a picky eater when it comes to mirrors. Anyway, off into the neighborhood section here. We talk about round town manners, and of course go for our footless stop challenge. See if we can get 0 miles per hour without putting our feet down Always a good test of a bike's balance and poise. Yeah, swing and a miss on the first one, Zach. That's actually a little unfair for the GSX-8R because I think it's a pretty good round town bike. The biggest thing that helps it is the engine, which is, like I said, just very easy to use and basic and torquey and yeah, helpful in all situations such as these. There we go. That was a nice, good one. And when I think about the weight, I mentioned the fact that I was impressed that it feels as light as it does, considering the scales didn't say it was particularly light. And when I ride it around in situations like this around town, that rings true for sure. It doesn't feel to me like a 450 pound bike. It feels much more like a 420 or 430 pound bike, and that's a pretty big compliment to Suzuki, I think. Doing this on this bike mostly reminds me of why the standard of motorcycling is what it is, because this is not an outstanding motorcycle in any one category of feel. It doesn't have a ton of horsepower, it doesn't have particularly spicy equipment or interesting componentry or something like that, but it's just built well and it works well. The clutch feel is good, the throttle response is good, the way it steers and handles and moves underneath you is just good. And that stands to reason for a company like Suzuki, which has been around for a while and knows what it's doing. It's quite a good motorcycle, round town or otherwise really, but it's especially easy to use in these situations, especially compared to traditional sport bikes. It has a heavy dose of practicality built into it. And so if you're actually going to use it day to day, you're going to appreciate that, I believe. Here we are in Lover's Lane, and I can tell you that the passenger accommodations on the GSX-8R are nothing to be impressed by. No real priority put on the passenger seat as far as I can tell. I can plop back here and sit and remind myself that it's quite thin and not particularly interesting, or maybe that's something else that the GSX-8 GT would have, is a more plush passenger seat and a slightly different design on the tail section, which I meant to point out in the parking lot, but has a weird dangly taillight situation, which is probably going to look sweet with a tail tighty and, you know, undertail kit, but looks a little bit odd and also does not provide a whole lot of real estate for the passenger, for whatever that's worth to ya. Right into the Twisty Road section, where you'd expect a sport bike to excel, and the old GSX-8R certainly does. I think it's really nice to ride in situations like this, mostly because it's just easy and really neutral, kind of for the same reasons it's nice to ride around town. It does have a couple of things about it that are different than the GSX-8R naked bike, which has been covered on Daily Rider here before. One of which is that the compression damping in the fork is styled up a little bit, it's a little stiffer, which theoretically provides you more support on the brakes or diving into corners and that kind of thing. And there's technically a different lower triple clamp because the fork is made by a different company, I believe, than the S. But all of that is to say, I don't think any of it is specifically something that you would notice riding it back to back, but they are steps that Suzuki took to try to make the bike sportier. The view from 10,000 feet is that it's really good at this kind of thing. It's nice. It works well despite not having any suspension adjustability, really, aside from the preload and the shock, like I mentioned. And it's just really neutral. It doesn't require a lot of body language to, you know, lean off to get it to turn. And at the same time, it feels very stable and not twitchy or anything like that. All of which leads to an experience that just feels like the motorcycle is trying to make you better and make you more comfortable while you ride down the road. And that's just about all you can ask for from any bike, but especially a sport bike. I do have a couple of irks, one of which is that the quick shifter is not perfect. Upshifts are quite good. The downshifts are not good. There's not enough auto blip. It just feels a little bit clumsy and awkward. In fact, I'll go up to 5th so that we can go down. The demonstration will be less prominent to you, it will be to me because I can feel it, but when you go down, yeah, fourth to third, it's just really like, it almost feels like you're forcing the gearbox to do something it doesn't want to do. And I've taken to using this handy dandy lever on the left handlebar, which allows you to downshift and upshift if you pull it in. Pro tip there, hey? I mentioned I had a couple of irks. My other one is that the ABS is a little bit unsophisticated. I feel like it intervenes too quickly, and it just feels a little bit clumsy and not sporty enough, frankly. I guess, considering the context of this motorcycle, I wish that there were a, I don't know, sport mode or track mode or something that just sort of like allowed a little bit more aggressive braking to take place before the ABS intervened, while maintaining the, you know, maybe more conservative setting for folks who are newer to motorcycling, because maybe that would make them more comfortable. I failed to do an actual braking test as we approached this light, but like I said in the intro, good componentry. Big 4-pop calipers and, you know, radially mounted, and rotors that are they 300s, 310s? I hope so. We'll put the number on screen right now, but in either case, they're, if not superbike sized, they are pretty close. And as I mentioned, with the weight, you know, it weighs as much as an R1 or something, so I feel like it ought to have brake rotors that are about that size, even if the calipers and the rest of the componentry is not quite as spicy. All right, we're coming to a red light so we can talk about those there brakes down there. Yeah, it just doesn't quite give me quite enough, you know, plenty of stopping power. It just feels like I can't access it. It's not particularly switchable either, which on that topic, we can dive into talk about the dash a little bit here. So it is an auto switching dash, auto brightness I should say, dims a little bit when it gets dark and then turns black at night, which is a nice feature that a lot of TFTs often do these days. I think this dash is laid out really nicely. All the stuff you need to see is nice big lettering, and it's clear and crisp and high contrast, and the letters and numbers are separate enough from each other that you feel like you know what's going on. There's plenty of information, but it doesn't feel crowded and cluttered. In general, I really, really like it. To get into the menus, you hold down on this little 3-button control here. That's the other thing. The controls are... Do you do that? Hold up? Hold up, evidently. To get into this menu here, where you can go in and mess with the old quick shifter settings, which consist of on and off, which I wish it had some adjustability for downshifts, as I said, because I don't think it's very good. Shift light setting, and then, you know, your sort of brightness units, system information, mumbo jumbo. It's not bad, but it's not particularly interesting. I don't think, for example, it's set up quite as well as the Honda Hornet switch cluster and dash that we rode here recently. But I do appreciate that the basic riding screen and the basic information that you see most of the time is clean and good, because that's the most important thing. So would you buy a GSX-8R just for the engine, that 776cc, 82 horsepower power plant down there that Suzuki no doubt put quite a bit of effort into? You know, no, I don't think so. I don't think it really does anything special enough. You know, Suzuki was kind of late to the game with the whole parallel twin 270 crank thing, right? I mean, Yamaha was doing it a long time ago, and even Honda, which was a little bit late to the game, have done a better job, I think. So I don't think that this engine, while it is quite good, ranks highly enough for me to think that it would sway you into purchasing this bike, because it doesn't do anything that other engines don't, as far as I can tell. Which isn't to say that this bike does not have value or stand alone, because while the Honda engine, the Aprilia 660 engine, the Yamaha parallel twin, all kind of have standout qualities above this engine, the bike and the way it's set up is unique in the class, I think. All right, nearing the end of the ride here, and we can circle back to that topic that we talked about in the beginning. This is the best-selling, or one of, motorcycles for Suzuki in the United States of America. And you might be thinking, well, at this point, I'm not sure why, because Zack said there's no suspension adjustability, and the quick shifter doesn't work all that well, and the engine's not really a standout, and like, cool, he thinks it's a sport touring bike with a small gas tank. Is that why it sells so well? That doesn't make any sense. Well, it's because sport bikes are changing, right? Yamaha has discontinued the R6 and discontinued the R1 in Europe, I believe. The CBR 600 from Honda has dwindled to a lonely little bullet point at the bottom of a product page. It's not a bike that people really talk about or buy anymore. People are buying practical sport bikes that make more sense, in part because they're cheaper to manufacture, because sport bikes that only have 2 cylinders and 8 valves are easier for motorcycle manufacturers to build, and they're better for emissions regulations. And the collateral benefit there is that the engines work really nicely on a day-to-day basis when you ride them around. They're torquey and linear and punchy and easy to use, and that has translated into Yamaha R3s and R7s and R9s and GSX-8Rs and Aprilia RS660s, bikes that oftentimes take a street engine and apply it to a sport bike look or feel. And that is easier for people to insure, easier for people to ride, and really kind of delivers most of what you want in a sport bike. And that's why I say don't be frightened by the fact that I mentioned the word touring when I said what this bike was good at, because the engine's good at that and because it's pretty comfortable. That shouldn't scare you away from the fact that you can take it to a track day and rail around. This bike competes in Moto America Twins Cup competition. Granted, not in this state. They use adjustable suspension. They use different handlebars, I'm sure. But the point is, it was built with a little bit of performance prowess and purpose in mind. And if you're a really good rider, you're going to override it. Yeah, sure. It's not a quote-unquote real sport bike. But if you're not a really good rider, you're going to get just about everything you need out of this bike and more. And I think that's why people are buying it, because it makes sense and it does everything they need it to do, including, but not limited to, going down a dirt road. All right, let's take it for a spin, shall we? Recent rain has tamped down the dust, let's hope. Oops, I got my high beams on for some reason. Let's see here. So the basic ride mode situation, I didn't talk about at the light there because I ran out of time. I do apologize. You can, by tapping on this mode button, jump into TC here, and you can select off level 1, level 2, or level 3. Pretty basic there. And then you can pick from 3 different ride modes, the typical Suzuki A, B, and C. Aggressive, basic, and comfort is what I was told at the DRZ 4S launch, and I think it pretty much translates to this bike as well. Yeah, A is a little bit sharp, C is a little bit dull, B is what I think the bike should just have and doesn't really need those other ones anyway, but it's cool that you have some adjustability. So let's start in TC3, shall we? I think we know what we're going to learn here. It's going to be pretty conservative. Wow, actually not as conservative as I thought. Okay, well, let's go to... I do appreciate the simplicity. It's so easy to adjust, and you can do it all on the fly, which is great. That's actually pretty good. Yeah, you can get a little bit of you can feel it and you have a little bit of wheel spin. I still feel like in general it's a little bit unsophisticated, and I do prefer off on any dry condition with this bike because I don't think it's going to jump out and bite you in any way. And you do have enough power to spin the wheel, that's for sure. It sort of feels like if I close my eyes, I'm on like a real sporty V-Strom here. Yeah. Probably not going to get away from me if you ride on a dirt road, because the engine is, like I've been saying all along here, really kind of punchy and powerful, but predictable and linear, which is by and large a very, very good thing. But can you do a wheelie, Zach? Well, I mean, yeah. You bet your Gixxer t-shirt you can. Good wheelie bike. Good wheelie engine for all the reasons I just mentioned. So can you back it in? Speaking of pure sport bike performance, kind of. If you just like dump the clutch, you can get it to wag its tail a little bit, but not a ton of adjustability in the electronics to support a lot of hooliganism, which is unfortunate from my standpoint, but you know, if I'm being honest, I understand where Suzuki's coming from. Fairly conservative company in general, and you could argue that this ain't the bike for it. All right, looks like we might actually have some room for a U-turn challenge. I should mention, I don't remember the exact numbers, but the GSX-8R has less steering sweep than the GSX-8S on account of being a sport bike and not a naked bike. I still think it's going to do pretty well here. So let's line up next to this Ford Transit, not clap the mirrors together. I'll start right in kind of the middle here. Okay, full lock left, feet up. I would say that was 2 parking spaces, something like that. Maybe a titch more. Quite a practical sport bike. And I say that with lots of admiration, frankly, because the world is not short on high performance sport bikes, especially Suzuki's lineup, right? Suzuki has more inline 4 sport bikes than most companies. So if you want that, you can get it. And I think it's a high time Suzuki built a bike like this, and I think they did a pretty darn good job doing it. It doesn't have the same thump and presence that that Honda Hornet engine has, in my opinion. And it doesn't have the performance numbers of the RS660. It doesn't have the 3-cylinder howl of the Daytona 660. And it doesn't have the sort of approachability and playful character that the Yamaha engine has. It really sounds like a damning review. But the bottom line is, it's a great engine. I don't think it does anything wrong. It just, the jazz hands of some of the other bikes. Okay, anyway, you all asked me some questions. Let's talk about those, shall we? Okay, so first question we're going to cover here is from Rally Roasted, who says, in a 2-bike garage, would you recommend this as the, quote, practical sport bike? Absolutely. In fact, I was just saying that, wasn't I? Pretty practical. Yeah. Yes. Next question is from SV650 Rider. Uh-oh. Question is, Suzuki retired the SV in other markets. Do you think this will eventually be its successor? Yes. Right? How could it not be? Everyone will be sad when that bike goes away because it has been such a beacon of fun and of excitement and practicality and approachability and accessibility. It's just a terrific motorcycle. But this bike has 1-cylinder head and is easier to manufacture, I assume, and does all the same things. So I don't see how you could say that the SV is not going to be replaced by this eventually. Suzuki still says that's not the case as of the production of this video, but you have to feel that that's the case. If not, I'll be a happy camper, I suppose, because I think the SV is great. But if I'm the head of Suzuki and I'm looking at the lineup, I don't see what the SV does that this doesn't. Aside from have a different engine, but practically, you get it. Good question. And I assume by your username SV650 Rider that you will be dumping out a splash more so than most. Next question is from my old friend Spurge Dunbar. Spurgeon Dunbar, my podcast co-host, confidant, friend, and keeper of secrets. Spurge Dunbar said, you said I wouldn't like this bike on the track. Is that still true? Is the black color better than the yellow? This or a used SV650? If you're the certain person, maybe a used SV650 would be the way to go. As a first bike, I would say, yeah, go used SV. As a second or third bike, I might say treat yourself to the new hotness. I don't know. The yellow one's better than the black. Obviously, stupid question. Spurge said, you said I wouldn't like this bike on the track. Is that still true? No, I was wrong. This would be a good track bike. Would I like this bike on the track? No, I don't think so. And with all of the respect in the world to my dear friend Spurge Dunbar, he's not as good a track rider as I am. And there is a tipping point here. As I mentioned at the end of the video, I think, if you're an experienced track rider, you're going to want to either spend a bunch of money on this bike or you're going to wish you had something that's higher performance. Spurge has some track experience. He's a competent rider on the track and has track days under his belt. And I think that he would appreciate the amount of power, performance that this bike delivers. So, Spurgeo, along with the insult I issued to you that I am a better track rider than you are, I will say that I was wrong and you were right. I think you would like this bike on the track. Next question is from Nugget401, who says, would you rather have the GSX-8R or the Yamaha R9? Now, there was a reply to this question on my Instagram feed that said, that's not the right comparison. It's the R7. That's what you mean, because that's the parallel twin. And I think that person is right to some extent, right? The R7 maybe is a better comp to this bike, even though it's cheaper, I believe, because of the parallel twin and whatever, and so on and so forth. But the R9 is an interesting comparison, and I think that people will be doing that, right? Because this is an 800, ostensibly, and the R9 is a 900 ostensibly. They're only 100 cc's apart about, and so people might be making that comparison more often than we think. And I suppose more than answering the question directly, which I will do, I promise, I would like to point out that these are very different bikes. The R9 is much less comfortable and much more prepared to go on the track. It has Brembo brakes, it has fully adjustable suspension, I believe. The engines are the most comparable thing about the two bikes. I think the engines are quite comparable, actually. Like, I think an MT-09 and GSX-8S are actually pretty similar bikes, and those are comps. They should easily be cross-shopped, whereas the GX-8 is much more on the tier of the GX-8S. The R is, that is. The R9 is a different plane of performance than the MT-09. It has higher spec componentry, it has more purposeful ergonomics, it's a lot less comfortable, it's a lot more committed, and I think that that's the thing that you should be concerning yourself with, not the performance metrics of the engine or kind of like what they look like on the spec sheet. As for which one I would have, oh my God, that's such a tough question. If you said I could have a bike for a year, or like you got to spend your own money and you got to ride it for a year or 2 years or 5 years, I'm getting a Night R. I am. An R9 is a higher spec bike. It's worth the money. It has more performance. It has better stuff on it. It's going to be faster around a racetrack. But this bike is just so much better every other day. The only time I would recommend an R9 is if you're really serious about your track riding. Last question here comes from Zack's Tread, maybe, who says, if this bike were a Disney princess staring into a pan of discarded Motul engine oil and it began to sing, what is the existential crisis that it would sing about? This is too good a question not to answer. And if this bike were going to be self-conscious about anything, I think it would be the same tune that most Disney princesses sing about, right? I don't know if I'm familiar enough with Disney princesses, but it would be, on what road do I ride when everyone else is better, faster, cheaper? The Honda Hornet's engine is more powerful and better. The R7 from Yamaha feels like a sport bike when you sit on it. The Daytona 660 has a lovely 3-cylinder howl. And the RS 660 has a face that does not look like a demented owl. On what road will I ride? Not being the fairest of them all. Where will I go when everyone else is faster and cheaper and lighter? If you sat through my singing, I appreciate it. But yeah, that's the Disney song. Like, what do you do when you don't have any real standout qualities, except for the fact that when you actually ride the bike, it's actually really, really good. Let's put the sucker on the Daily Rider leaderboard and I can let you go. All right.
Okie doke, everybody, here we go at the Daily Rider leaderboard. We've got a Suzuki GSX-8R right here, ready to go. As a reminder of the podium, as it stands in 2025, you've got your Honda CB750 Hornet at the top, which we just talked about, the Triumph Tiger Sport 800, and the CF Moto Ibex 450, rounding out the top three there. Where do we think the old GX-8R will fall? A podium spot, perhaps? Better than a CF Moto Ibex 450? In some ways, yeah. The track day capability of the GX-8R is appealing, but it's not to the extent that I would really bump it above a lot of other bikes that can't do that. And the Ibex 450 is one of them. It's going to be below there. What about some more sporty-ish? Okay, here we go. Honda NT1100, Kawasaki H2 SX SE. Very different motorcycles, I will admit. Honda NT1100 is the dual clutch transmission sport touring bike, if you remember correctly. Kawasaki H2 SX SE, supercharged, super fast, super premium, spicy and pricey, as we say. So these are very different than the GX-8R, as well as being very different from each other. However, they have fairings and they have some amount of street capability. So I think I'm sooner to recommend a GX-8R than an NT, ultimately, I believe. Same goes with the H2 SX. It'd be hard to say no to a supercharged, 200 horsepower sport touring bike with radar cruise control, blah, blah, blah. But the GSX-8R is a kind of a better overall bike, and it's something like a third of the price, a quarter of the price, whatever, you get it. Okay, so that's sorted. It's going to be between here and here. Smart Pillon 801, actually quite similar to the old GSX-8S, which is of course the naked version of the bikes that we just rode today. Yamaha MT-09, also a naked mid-size bike. We talked about the MT-09 a little bit during the Instagram questions. Very comparable bikes, these ones, I think, to the GSX-8R. Albeit the GSX-8R has a fairing, fine, whatever, but if you're cross-shopping these, I'm not mad about it. Where did the GSX-8S fall? 23, here we go, 2023, GSX-8S. That was in 4th place. I think the GSX-8R and the GSX-8S are similar enough, actually, that they are going to fall in the same place on the leaderboard. In other words, GSX-8R would have been here in 2023. 2024, don't worry about that. In 2025, I think the GSX-8R is gonna fall, I'm gonna put it right here. I'm gonna put it above the MT-09 because I feel like the GSX-8R has fewer flaws than the MT-09, ultimately. The MT-09 had some annoying things, from ECU mapping, fueling, to that blinker switch that I won't stop talking about. It's punchier, it's faster, it's a little bit more premium than a GSX-8R, no doubt about it, a little more expensive too. I think I'd recommend a GSX-8R sooner for the person who wants sort of a do-it-all, or do most things and do them pretty well kind of bike. I'm not going to give it the nod over the Svartpilen 801 because I've just felt like that bike had some zazz and some punch and an amount of kind of simplicity and elemental joy that the GSX-8 does not. Okay, we got it on the board. I'm tired of talking. You're probably tired of listening. So I'll say what I always say. I hope you learned something. I hope you had fun. And I hope to see you next time on Daily Rider. See you, everybody. Ride safe.
Sweat running down my upper lip into my mouth and down my, what the fudge are you doing?